This program is brought to you by thepodcastfactory.com.
How would you like to get more customers, make more profits, and have bigger breakthroughs? Get Doberman Dan's profit-boosting breakthroughs. Normally, this would cost you $98 per month, but right now, for listening to this show, he's giving you a free copy of his Doberman Dan letter. All you have to do is go to DobermanDan.com and sign up to get your free copy now.
Prepare yourself for the uncensored, nothing held back, no BS reality of how business and life really work. Doberman Dan is off the chain.
A question. An important question.
Yes.
How you gonna do it if you really don't want to dance? By standing on the wall? Get your back up off the wall. The wisdom of that 1980s wisdom of Kool and the Gang. You remember that song?
Absolutely. Get down on it.
I mean, is this some profound wisdom just contained in this first verse? How are you going to do it if you really don't want to dance? By standing on the wall? Get your back up off the wall. I mean, that is the answer to so many things.
Words to live by.
I'm extremely fond of the 80s. That's probably the decade in which you were born, right?
No, I'm a little bit older than that.
Oh, okay. The 80s seemed like such a happy decade for me. Maybe it's because, that was the decade I graduated from high school and all the music seemed to be happy, the Kool and the Gang, Celebration, Men Without Hats, the Safety Dance. And it just was a happy time, And then came the 90s and everything got really dark in the music scene and all the people started singing like,
got grungy.
Yeah. And so I just have fond memories of the 80s, which leads me to our thang this week. Speaking of the 80s, Joe Satriani, an awesome guitarist. I didn't realize it was this long ago, but 30 years ago, was when he released his first 5-song self-produced vinyl, believe it or not, EP. Wow. I mean, that's the norm now, right?
Yeah.
You see all these musicians doing the self-released thing.
They don't have vinyl, though.
Sure seems like, no, vinyl. Although some people are still into that, but no, it's so much easier to do your own thing these days. It seems to be, this is the new music business model. But I mean, back then that was very rare. He's got an interesting story. So he releases his own EP back in the 80s. He was an unknown. He was just a guitar teacher out of Berkeley, California. And he's just been doing his thing for 30 plus years and has built himself a really nice following, a really nice herd, as Dan Kennedy would say. And as a result of building his herd, it's what has allowed him to just continue doing his thing all these years. So I just wanted to share some little tidbits I got out of this article from Guitar Player that Joe would sharing some of his insights into his 30-year success story. And I thought maybe you and I could riff on this a little bit. So he says, well, he got sick and he got what is H1N1? What virus is that? Do you remember?
H1, it sounds like bird flu or something like that.
A bird flu? Oh, okay. So he got that. He said he was just so sick that he couldn't really do much of anything, couldn't travel or anything. He was just sitting around. The only thing he could do was, play the guitar and write some music. And he came up with 60 new pieces of music. Just like while he was resting in various rooms throughout the house, he'd come up with song ideas and record it into his iPhone. And he realized that, he had this cathartic moment that he'd finished this box set, by the way. So back up a minute. He had just released this box set, the complete studio recordings box set, which was 30 years of his stuff. And he said him being sick made him stop and think about some things that, okay, just release this box set. And he just felt like, all right, well, I'm finally finished with my past. I'm really done with it. I don't have to think about the past anymore. It's captured in the box set. I can just totally focus on the future. And all of a sudden, he just felt reawakened, rejuvenated, that things were just back on track. And I don't know how many times I felt that way too. We're just burned out, man. Do you ever go through that?
Yeah, I go through sprints. I don't know how you work. I think you're more disciplined than me, but I kind of go through sprints. So I will go through a level of achievement for about 60, 90 days max. And then I'm done and I need to just fade out for a little while.
Well, that's smart because that way you can sprint while you have the energy and then rest or coast when you don't. And those that try to push it too far seem to wind up in some state of burnout. But I don't know, this was just kind of a realization to me, like, all right, what you finished is finished. Put it in the past. Quit pulling it out and trying to dabble at it or trying to improve it or tweak it. What's done is done. What's in the past, focus on the future, focus on the new stuff. I mean, that's what gives me my energy, to think that I got to tweak something and constantly try to improve it, or worse, try to perfect it. That's the curse of the perfectionism, is trying to perfect it just leads to burnout.
Yeah, it reminds me of what you and Jack were talking about. What was it, the last show or the show before that, where some marketers lose all interest after they get paid. And it kind of reminds me of that, where we don't want to necessarily keep tweaking and keep fixing because it's not as interesting to guys maybe like you and me. Maybe I shouldn't be speaking for you, but I once something's working, I don't want to mess with it.
Yeah, I mean, it gets to the point where good enough is good enough, and the curse of perfectionism it just sucks all the joy out of life. Although, now then on the flip side of that is this other thing that I was reading where he said his parents had one of those big reel-to-reel recorders, and they gave it to him. This was back in 1970. So they gave it to him and said, hey, here you go. Maybe you can use this with your guitar stuff. So he said he would tape himself playing and he'd think, yeah, that's pretty good. This sounds pretty good. And then he'd play it back and listen to it objectively and compare it to what he was hearing on the radio and think, oh my God, I suck. And there's this huge gap between what he wanted and where he was at. And so that was his secret. This kind of goes against what we were just saying, like good enough is good enough. But that was the secret. That constantly listen, assess, reassess, figure out, okay, so I played this and that sucked, so I won't do that again, And so, just constantly listening to what he did and going back and reevaluating it. By the way, he said even now, he'll record something and he'll think, oh my gosh, this is just killer. And then he'll leave it till the next day, listen to it and think, what the hell was I thinking? This completely sucks. And I immediately felt this sigh of relief. I'm thinking, oh man, I thought it was just me that suffered with that. My wife likes to listen. Remember that solo CD I put out at the end of last year? So my wife likes to listen to that, especially one of those songs, which was dedicated to her. And I just can't stand it, man. I mean, like I cringe or I literally have to leave the room. I just can't listen to it because even in that short period of time, I've gotten better. And one of the reasons I got better is because a lot of stuff on that album sucked. And it's just like being a writer, the biggest obstacle between you and writing something good is letting yourself write a really shitty first draft. So, I let myself release a shitty first album. But that was the process, that I had to go through to get better. And I'm already working on number 2. So the goal is, hopefully at least, number 2 will be better.
And not take you 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. The first one, well, there's a reason the first one took 20 years. It was that curse of perfectionism again.
That is scary, bro. You had the curse of perfectionism, and then you listen to it and you're like, this is shit.
This sucks. Yeah. And like, oh my God. And, part of it was going back and trying to fix all the stuff that sucked or trying to fix the mistakes, which, by the way, I just surfing the other night on Amazon, and I ran across a concert by Living Color. Were you ever hip to those guys back in the 90s?
Yeah, a long time ago. Yeah.
So I don't know how recent this was, but it was fairly recently, within the past couple years. They did a concert. It's on Amazon. And I used to really like those guys. I never really saw them live. I just liked their studio stuff. So I saw them on this live recording, and it's just so raw. And there are mistakes, and there is slop. I mean, those guys are really good musicians. They're not just the typical rock musician hacks. These guys are pretty well-educated musicians, but still, there's parts that are just really raw. And it was so beautiful. I know that seems like counterintuitive or contrarian, but the rawness of it is what made it beautiful. That it was just in the moment, and they were just playing. They didn't care about the rawness of it, which is what Joe Satriani was saying in this article. He said he recorded a melody on an 8-track cassette recorder, not 8 tracks like back in the day, 70s. This is like 8-track, multi-track recorder, but kind of it's kind of an amateur thing. It ain't a professional thing you use for a finished recording. But so he relearned what he recorded on the demo and went into the studio. He relearned it, polished it, got it to perfection. And each take was just falling flat. Even the producer was saying, something just ain't right. And he goes, well, man, let me just let you hear what I played, the melody I played on the demo. It's pretty raw, but check it out. And the producer's like, that's it. That is the one shot, perfect take. And Satriani was like, well, wait a minute. It's not perfect. This was just the demo, and there's slop in there. And the producer told him, no, within the slop is the magic. That's part of it. So, doing all the high-tech stuff, they lifted it off of the demo, put it on Pro Tools, and added it to the actual finished recording. And that was the one, that made it on the box set. And that was the magic version. So sometimes there's something magic. There's something captured in the slop. There's something to be said of just banging the damn thing out and just letting it stand as is. I guess that goes back to the stop being a perfectionist thing, doesn't it?
It goes back even further than that and look, I'm hearing this from all corners, so I know that you've struck a nerve with people, but it goes back to just sell the damn thing, right? Don't let your product be perfect. Don't worry about it. Release version 1.0 and then go from there. Just sell the damn thing. Just record the damn thing. Just do the damn thing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no way to get to version 2.0 without putting out 1.0. And, you may just get lucky. You may version 1.0 with its slop and everything and typos and imperfections may be the thing that at just the right moment in time resonates with the right audience, and it is the home run. Like maybe it's the next coat of arms letter for anybody who's familiar with that analogy. Though back in the old direct mail days, the Gary Halbert coat of arms. There's something. Since we're talking about music, the Rolling Stones, I think, are a good example of this. Those guys, on their best days, are hack musicians. There's probably a 12-year-old kid in his garage right now who's only been playing a year who could play circles around that guy. Hell, look on YouTube. There are fetuses, playing guitar on YouTube that can play circles around those guys. But there's something magical in the slop of the Stones. And it's, what? I can't put my finger on it. Can you?
No.
What is it exactly? I don't know. But it's something. Something comes together. Something happens. It's either an attitude they have. It's a mindset. Maybe it's just a magic combination of their collective slop produces the magic. Yeah, I found the same thing in copy. I've seen really well-written pieces that are grammatically perfect, and the flow is there, and they just read like a textbook case of journalism. And as far as sales go, they just completely suck. And then I've seen stuff that would be marked up with red pen by any English teacher that all kinds of mistakes and typos and no fancy writing, simple fourth grade level writing that just turns out to be, that grand slam home run we always want. Does this seem like I'm like too much of a stretch? I mean, I like Joe Satriani. I really liked what he had to say in this article. So I wanted to like apply it to the world of being an entrepreneur. So yeah, I may be stretching it a little bit, but I think it all gets us to the same place, right?
Yeah, it's well, you had Sean D'Souza on the show, and this is what it's reminding me of. He does the 3-month vacation in episode 19. So this tells you what a dork I am. But I always refer episode 19 to people, and he talks about the 70% principle where programmers, just like Jack, that's what's reminding me of it, just put out a 70% product. If the software is 70% ready, they put it out to market to get the feedback, find out if it's hitting, if it's not hitting, what they can improve, and then they come back and do iterations. And I think that's where most of us get caught up. We're sitting here trying to make the perfect product or the perfect piece of information, the perfect software, and there's no such thing. You have to put it out in the world and get the feedback from the people who are actually using it.
So what do you think? Why do people do that? What is the fear that prevents them from putting it out?
It's school. It's it's the government-sponsored youth indoctrination camps where you have to get an A on a project. You have to get 100% or 90% on your test. And people get this idea that they have to be perfect the first time out of the gate or they're failures. And so we're conditioned to either pass along their guidelines or fail. There's no in between, and real life doesn't work that way.
Nobody hits one out of the park the first time up to bat. Just before we started this interview, I got an email from one of my coaching students who launched first ad he's written ever. And he launched it in a newspaper ad, and it's just not generating the amount of calls he needs. And I know he's disappointed, but I told him, this is par for the course. There was no way of you knowing that until you ran the ad and got some data. Now you got data, and now you realize something is not really resonating because it's not generating calls. So great, let's try a new headline, let's try a new image. Let's try a different call to action or something. Not all at the same time, of course, but I mean, this is the process. Everybody likes to brag about their home run the first time up to bat. Just real life doesn't work that way.
Womp, womp, womp. Actually, this is good if you folks are resilient, if you got the grit, right? If you got the grit to take your lashing and come back from it, then this is good news because you can get through this if you have this attitude. But if you think it's going to be perfect the first time, you're screwed.
Totally screwed. And Joe Satriani was even saying that with his project, not just the solo stuff, but he's in a band called Chickenfoot with Sammy Hagar and Michael Anthony on bass, who used to be the bass player for Van Halen. And that's what they do. First of all, they pursue whatever excites them artistically, but they decided that they're going to do the records totally by themselves. They're not going to do it with a label because then the label starts dictating what you're going to do and what you should and shouldn't do. And so they just entered into that deal into Chickenfoot as a creative partnership. And they decide, we're just going to do this on our own. We're going to do what we think is right, and we're going to put it out there. They'll find a one-time like distribution deal for the album, but not a traditional record deal where everything is dictated to them. And they'll put it. They had no long-term plan whatsoever. They go, we're going to put an album out. Let's see what happens. If people dig it and want more, we'll do more. And they weren't happy with the first out. They were satisfied. They weren't happy, but they just put it out there. They ran it up the flagpole to see how many people would salute it. And, it attracted a following. And they're like, okay, great. Let's do another one. And they feel like the only way they could have accomplished that was just doing it on their own. So they had the creative control to do what they wanted and just put it out there. Again, I'm beating a dead horse, aren't I?
No, actually, I think this is going to be new for 2017. You just sell the damn thing, and then the other thing, chickenfoot it. You got to chickenfoot it.
Chickenfoot.
That's going to be one of your things.
I got to tell you, the perfectionism thing wasn't the total reason it took me 20 long years to finally do a solo album. It was fear of criticism, mostly fear of what other musicians would say. But ironically, that's never been a fear in my entrepreneurial career, even though it's happened all the time. No matter what you put out, I mean, you literally could put out perfectionism if that were possible. Let's assume it is possible and you can put out something that's perfect. You are still going to get criticized for it. Now, most of the people criticizing you for it are people who've never done what you've done. So if you've written a book, the people who are going to criticize you are the ones who've never written a book. Now, they can tell you all the ways to write a good book, but they've never written one. But I think that's another big factor, don't you? Just the fear of criticism.
Yeah, well, that's the teacher scolding you and the parents saying, what are you doing? We're sending you to school and all you got to do is get good grades. It's all that you're afraid of. So that's why you'd rather not try. And in fact, what's funny about that, Dan, is you know that I was a D student in school and I never tried. And I was reading one of these books where I realized something. I think the book is called Mindset by Carol Dweck. I'm not 100% sure, but she talks about how they raise kids and how the parents who praise their kids too much mess with their heads, because if they can't do something perfect or they can't do something that's worthy of praise, then they don't try at all. And that's exactly what I did in school. I didn't try at all because I couldn't live up to whatever expectations they had. So I'd rather not do anything.
Well, I mean, that's how you were conditioned. That's what the system wanted to condition you to.
Crazy stuff. So Dan, what do you have coming up for us next time?
I've never done this before. I'm hoping it'll be fun, but we're going to take questions from the Canine Crew.
Really? Questions from the Canine Crew. All right. I'm looking forward to that. So questions from the Canine Crew on the next one. That's another Off the Chain show in the can. We'll be back with you next time.
Thanks for listening. And remember, if you want to create rivers of revenue from your existing customers, then the next thing you need to do is go to DobermanDan.com. He's giving away a free copy of his $98 per month Doberman Dan letter just for listening to the show. Go to DobermanDan.com now and sign up for your free issue.
This is the podcastfactory.com.